Chills. Number 6. Slitzy. In the 1930s, the Barnum and Bailey Circus was known throughout the country for its spectacular traveling freak shows, and Slitzy was on the top of its attractions. Standing only 4 feet tall, the little person was plagued by a host of deformities, most notably his tiny shrunken head, which was only a fraction of a normal size and rose to a pointed tip. His appearance was made even more bizarre when the Barnum and Bailey Circus decided to put him on the freak show roster as a girl, first billing him as Maggie, last of the Aztec children, and later more famously as Slitzy Sertrees the Pinhead. For the second persona, they gave Slitzy a flowery dress and a little tuft of hair that they pulled back into a girl's ponytail, ribbon and all. His legend grew as he traveled from town to town, scaring and intriguing everyone in sight. While Slitzy did not necessarily do anything scary in his act, the medical explanation for his condition is the real reason why he makes the list here on Chills. Poor Slitzy was born with microcephaly, which has recently made headlines again with the Zika virus outbreak in Brazil. This virus, which is transmitted by mosquito bite, caused over 5,000 cases of microcephaly this year in Brazil alone, and many more throughout South America. In severe cases of microcephaly, like with Slitzy, the baby has an unformed brain, which can result in seizures and problems with motor coordination, vision, and hearing, along with mental retardation. Sufferers of this condition are severely mentally unstable and often require lifetime supervision. With that said, Slitzy's mother probably did not get bitten by a Zika-infected mosquito when she was pregnant. There are other ways to develop microcephaly besides mosquito bites, such as alcohol abuse and malnutrition during pregnancy, or birth complications during the delivery itself. Still, the thought that Brazil could have an entire generation of upcoming Slitzys on their hands is disturbing enough to make him number 6 on this list. Number 5. Chang and Ang. You may have heard of 2 people who are joined together at birth being referred to as Siamese twins. While the term directly refers to these 2 brothers in particular, named Chang and Ang. In 1811, the brothers were born in a remote fishing village in Siam, now known as Thailand. They were almost 2 fully separate people except for a giant chunk of flesh that connected them at the torso, more specifically at the liver. As a result of this mutation, they lived their entire lives facing chest to chest, with Chang on the left, who was shorter than his brother and seemed to permanently lean in. Despite their low chance of survival, especially in their small village just outside of Bangkok, their mother did not give up on them. Instead, she encouraged them to exercise and stretch until they could run, swim, and even steer a boat together. They probably would have been stuck selling duck eggs with their mother in Thailand if a British merchant hadn't seen them swimming in the river one day. At first, he thought they were some sort of animal he had never seen before, but after meeting them in person, he convinced their mother to sell them for $500 and take them back home for sideshows. Together, they toured all over London and made a good deal of money. At one point, top scientists even paid them to curiously study them, finding that Chang could sense when Ang was tickled, or when he ate something, and vice versa. Eventually, they toured America with the Barnum and Bailey Circus until they had enough money to settle down on their own as adults. They picked a spot in North Carolina, and here's where things get really bizarre even for Siamese twins. Chang and Ang were in their 30s by now. It was in the 1800s and slavery was still in full effect. Under a North Carolina legal loophole, Chang and Ang were classified as white and could legally own slaves, which they did, and by the dozens. That's right, despite being sold by their parents themselves, the twins grew up to be wealthy slave-driving businessmen on a large plantation. They even got married to 2 sisters. In fact, Chang and Ang had 21 kids between the 2 of them, though I suppose the babies all technically came from the same father. There's a thought. Being one of the first documented cases of conjoined twins is strange enough, but the way Chang and Ang died is definitely enough to earn them the number 5 position. They were 62 years old when Chang came down with a severe case of bronchitis. He had not been feeling well for a long time when the 2 went to bed one night as usual. When Ang woke up, however, he was horrified to see that he was now lying in bed attached to a dead body. Ang struggled and struggled, but there was nowhere for him to go. He died an hour later, medical examiners say from fright. Just imagine waking up next to your dead brother and knowing you will soon be next. Number 4, the Egyptian enigma. Haji Ali was born in 1800s Egypt, and he had the amazing ability to spit out vast quantities of water along with anything else he swallowed. He would commonly gulp down entire fishbowls of water and spit them back out in high arcs like an elegant human water fountain sculpture. Sounds interesting, right? Maybe even charming, or dare I say beautiful? Wrong. The audience may have been delighted. They may have clapped and cheered Haji on, but in reality, there's nothing attractive about what Haji was actually doing. Haji was a master of controlled regurgitation. What does this mean? He was vomiting everywhere. The vomit was incredibly accurate and precise, but he was still using intense stomach spasms to eject the contents of his stomach into containers and all over people as they cheered him on and begged him for more. Haji could even vomit a gallon of kerosene into a powerful geyser that he would set on fire. But that's not the point. The point is, if the audience knew that Haji's water spouting act was actually the same as throwing up, there probably would have been far more empty seats at his shows. That's just gross, Haji. Number 3, the Elephant Man. Born Joseph Merrick in 1862, the Elephant Man did not get his nickname from the condition known as elephantitis. Contrary to popular belief, the name has nothing to do with his appearance at all. Rather, it is the result of a medical diagnosis that a doctor gave to his mother after he explained that her son was deformed because she was scared by an elephant when she was pregnant. This is a true fact. A doctor really believed that the Elephant Man looked that way as a direct result of his mother having been scared by a circus elephant while pregnant. Obviously, medical science was somewhat lacking back then. To clear up another common misconception, Merrick did not have elephantitis at all, but rather Proteus syndrome, which is marked by an overgrowth of skin, bone, and organ tissue throughout the body. Merrick's deformities are not what placed him on this list, but rather how sad and lonely his life was. He started life looking completely normal as a child. Then at the age of 5, he began developing horrible tumors and lesions all over his body and face as the disease began to steadily take over. His disfigured appearance displeased his stepmother so much that he was kicked out of the home as a young boy. His biological father simply stood back and allowed for this to happen. During this time, he attempted door-to-door sales while wearing a burlap mask, which worked about as well as you would expect. Things just continued to get worse for the poor Elephant Man. He traveled to Belgium for work at a freak show, but was robbed and left for dead by his promoter. When he went back to London, he had grown so grotesque that he nearly started a riot at the train station by just standing around. By this point, the Elephant Man couldn't even speak, and only had a doctor's business card to show authorities as an explanation. At one point, he was eventually noticed and pitied by Queen Victoria herself, and he lived a higher quality of life with the upper class thanks to her sympathy. Still, he grew so lonely that he hoped to find love at a blind home out of his desperation. This never happened. You would hope that a person who had this rough of a life would at least get to die a peaceful death. The truth is, Merrick did die in his sleep, but probably not in the way you were hoping for. Merrick always slept sitting upright, but one night he decided to try something different and slept laying down. Unfortunately, his head had grown so ridden with tumors at this point that it was extremely heavy enough to dislocate his neck during his sleep. Was the Elephant Man still mercifully asleep when his neck snapped under the weight of his own misshapen head? Or was he awake and fully conscious to experience all of the pain? There is no way to tell for sure, but based on all of the previous suffering that he had to endure, there's no reason to suspect that his luck suddenly changed for the better in those final few moments. Number 2, the Lobster Boy Grady Stiles. "I'm not a fan of my dad as a person," said the son of Grady Stiles to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, going on to call his father racist and abusive. His daughter Kathy, on the other hand, prefers to describe her father as Satan himself. Grady Stiles, otherwise known as the Lobster Boy, was born with a special defect that mutated his hands and feet into single pincher claws. Most of the family is afflicted with the same genetic disease. Apparently, Grady's claws grew to become extremely muscular and powerful, which, when combined with a sadistic temper and alcoholism, was a recipe for mistreatment for his poor family. Though he appeared friendly enough at sideshow attractions he worked at, it was not uncommon, according to his family members, for the lobster boy to choke people with his claw-like hands and headbutt them in the stomach whenever he got angry or upset. The lobster boy himself, however, did not admit this. Instead, he preferred to talk at length about other uses for his wriggling appendages, which he says the women especially enjoyed. Either way, the family grew fearful of his constant threats, and one day Grady's wife had enough. She contacted a neighborhood friend and said she didn't feel safe, that something needed to be done and that she was willing to pay. According to Grady's wife, she had just meant to have him beaten up and taught a lesson, but one night as Grady pinched a cigarette between his claws and drank Seagram 7 on the sofa, a man entered his home and shot him in the head multiple times. The lobster boy was no more. He was hated by the local community so much that hardly anybody attended his funeral, and absolutely nobody would volunteer as a pallbearer to carry his coffin. Ironically enough, his tombstone is marked by 2 praying hands. Whether or not this was done intentionally to spite and mock him forever remains unknown. Number 1. The Running Man. No one on earth was more glad to be stabbed than Arnold Jarrett Henskes, aka Mirandayo, a European from the Netherlands. One day in the early 1900s, he traveled abroad to live with monks, at least according to his story. When he returned, he had learned a new skill that was unbelievable. He could stab himself without injury. Now, when I say he could stab himself without injury, we're not talking about some horizontal slash across the wrists. No, I mean this guy would stab his sword straight through himself and not even blink. After a while, he changed his name to Mirandayo and started making a living. He was such a medical marvel that doctors had to take a look for themselves. On multiple occasions, doctors from around the world performed a variety of medical tests on him while he stuck swords through his body over and over again. They even took an X-ray to verify that this wasn't one of the world's best optical illusions, but it certainly wasn't fake. Somehow he was truly able to impale himself without dying. Mirandayo had such confidence in his abilities and was so eager to show that this was not a trick that he encouraged doctors to run a blade through themselves. He even told them at times to be rougher and not so gentle. As if this weren't enough, on one occasion he began to jog laps with a sword sticking straight through him. That's right, this man was literally running swords through himself and then going running. Doctors have no easy explanation as to how he made this possible. Their best guess is that he was able to create tunnels of scar tissue for the sword to pass through by slowly inserting the blade inside of himself repeatedly over a number of years. Other monks are sometimes able to do something similar to this, but they can only run a sword through fatty areas such as their arms, never through vital organs, pretty much making him certifiably insane. In 1948, a voice in his head told him to swallow a steel needle and he died of a ruptured heart. When you already have a propensity for stabbing yourself, the last thing you want to hear is voices encouraging you to do more. But he did, and there's number 1 for you. Thanks for checking out this video. Please consider subscribing because we upload a new scary countdown every week. My name is Chills and my Twitter is at YTChills and my Instagram is at DylanIsChillinYT. I'd really appreciate a follow and feel free to send me a DM if you have any comments or suggestions. See ya!